We've heard from many of our Business Inspires podcast listeners that leaving a rating and review for the podcast in iTunes can be a bit difficult. So here's a painless way to do it. Go to pleasereviewmypodcast.com/BI for an easy step-by-step tutorial to follow. Reviewing and rating the Business Inspires podcast in iTunes helps us in so many ways, but most importantly, we get your feedback on what you like about the podcast. Thanks for being a listener and subscriber and going to pleasereviewmypodcast.com/BI. The link is in the podcast show notes.
This is Business Inspires, a monthly podcast of the TriVillage Chamber Partnership. To run a successful business, you need resources, valuable connections, and community recognition. Business Inspires will provide you with the tools, resources, and examples to inspire you to create the business you're envisioning. Here's Michelle Wilson, Executive Director of the TriVillage Chamber Partnership.
Hi, this is Michelle Wilson. I'm the Executive Director of the TriVillage Chamber Partnership. We are a pro-business organization in the Grandview Heights, Marble Cliff, and Upper Arlington communities. Today, we are speaking with Brett Johnson, who is the president and owner of Circle270Media, and he is the brains behind this podcast. So excited to finally have you on the podcast, Brett.
It's unusual to be on the other side of the soundboard.
I bet it is. So great to have you. We're excited about this. You came to me, a couple of years ago and had this idea of doing a podcast, and I looked at you probably like a deer in the headlights and thought, what are you talking about? Mm-hmm. And, how do we make this work for a Chamber of Commerce? Right. And it's probably one of my favorite parts of my job now. And, getting to talk to businesses and establish a connection with them, with the listener on a different level. People say, what is the Business Inspires podcast? And I say, we're talking about business and, why they do what they do. And it's so much more than that. And a lot of that was your idea. So tell me, why? Why did you think this was a good idea?
Working with you over the past, it's been now 5 or 6 years, I suppose. Mm-hmm. As we just talked about before recording, we are terrible at time stamps. So
yes, we are.
It could be a lot longer than that, but we don't want to age ourselves though either. I know that you have this unique dynamic with the chamber members, and even talking with you, it's comfortable. And I knew you'd be perfect. And that's what podcasts are all about, is to bring that emotion from your guest to talk about their business. And I think it's what's unique about podcasts is that it does it very, very well. You can't fake the emotion that you
That's true.
Speak into a mic.
You're right.
And video is the same way to a certain degree, but you can fake tears and bring that emotion out, but it's very hard to bring out the tears with just audio. Mm-hmm. The happiness, the joy, the excitement, you hear it in someone's voice about their business.
Right.
You can't fake that.
You're right. And the passion comes through.
It does. Definitely. And I know that you bring that out in everybody you talk to. Oh. You bring out the best. And I think podcasts is a very good forum for you. And I wanted to bring some value to the TriVillage Chamber Partnership as well. What can the chamber do for its members to showcase what's going on with this? And you're one of the very few chambers in the United States that even has a podcast. I've had calls to me asking about what's going on with this Business Inspires. What do you do? How do you do that? And I just give them the model and I say, listen.
That's great. Yeah, we love
just
that.
Find out about it. So between us and another chamber in Columbus, we're pretty much it.
Wow.
In regards to a chamber podcast.
That's exciting.
But I consider ours best, of course.
Well, so do I.
Because it's inspirational. Even in the name, it inspires. Come on.
So true. Well, and I do think that to set ourselves apart a little bit, we do delve a little bit more into the person.
Correct.
And not just what the business does and where they see it going and what, how they define success. Those are all key pieces of what we talk about and I think are important. But I really love the personal connection and why they started doing what they're doing or how they ended up there by accident. I think that's really exciting.
Every episode I've learned and grown myself from hearing these stories of, it's never an easy road. Usually it's not. You just expect it.
Right.
But every story is just accidental. I accidentally had a drink with this person, and to a T, every episode. And it's so exciting to hear those. Take the moment, expect it to happen, but recognize, oh yeah, this is my moment.
Yeah. And I love walking away with some nugget that they end up sharing, again, sometimes by accident, like Scott Humphreys at the Food Lab saying, somebody once told him to take the hard right. It's not the easy road, take the hard right, and look where he is.
Right.
And, Steve Weaver with the Candle Lab sharing some of his inspiration. And I walk away and I feel so fulfilled and excited that these businesses are in our community, and we get to sit down and chat with them for a few minutes.
And I think the small businesses don't get enough spotlight.
Right.
Of what they've done and are doing for the community. That's usually the bigger companies. They get the notoriety, they get the press,
right,
because of what they're doing. But again, they affect maybe more people overall because it's tied to stocks. Where we're dealing with as well as spotlight what Employing for Seniors does do, working with employers and the clients that they have over 50, both ends free, those services. So the podcast has been a very good opportunity. In fact, what's kind of fun to watch is we've been experimenting this year with Employing for Seniors in a new space. They now can have hiring events that they close the place down and bring in a recruiter that is they're hiring on the spot.
Oh, wow.
It's called a hiring event, and they're specifically looking for older adults. One example being TriStar Transportation. They love older adults. And they're taking kids to school morning and afternoon, but older adults are their target employee because they're dedicated, they're responsible, they're not on their phone while they're driving.
They probably have great driving records.
Exactly.
They have experience. Yeah.
So they will be having their second hiring event in July.
Okay.
What we do with the podcast is interview the recruiter and post a podcast about the hiring event.
Oh, great.
That doubles the downloads we have for that podcast.
Does it really?
Yeah. It happened overnight. The first one we posted, we started looking at the analytics and going, wow. Okay.
That's great. And it's nice to be able to track that because you do know what you're doing is working.
Yeah, it's working out beautifully in the long run. It's the long run for that podcast for that. That's one I'm working with. I've worked with a variety of other businesses. My focus has been mostly with business to business and working with an emotional emotional intelligence, a company called Spirit of EQ. They're very business to business, and the podcast works very well because you can target that, and the content's going to be more business driven. But their call to action is contact us, and we will do presentations. Okay. They've been laying out what is emotional intelligence, how does it affect employees and your higher level management, to basically analyze your employees so they're in the right spot. As time has gone on with Circle270 Media, my focus has been really working with businesses. Podcasting has democratized our voice. We don't have to rely on television, radio.
And you can hone the message. And I think that's really nice.
Yeah.
And when we first met all those years ago, however long it was, since we can't pinpoint that, you had a long-standing career in radio.
Right.
And with North American Broadcasting, they've been a great partner of the Chamber all of these years. And then you had this idea of podcasting, and I'm intrigued as to why. What was it that you thought, this is something and this is going to take off, and here's why? I
began in radio over 30 years ago, and anybody in the radio industry will know radio's changed a lot. Mm-hmm. And I think even listeners get it though too. If you've listened to radio for a few decades, you know the differences that are happening. And over the past 10 years or so, I've seen a big difference in regards to the economy of it, how it's used. It's just not accessible to businesses in regards to a long form talking about themselves. It's now 15 seconds, 30 seconds.
Sure.
Still effective to a certain degree, but you can't tell a story about your business in that amount of time. You can only really direct them to a call to action. Go to my website to get more information or to buy a certain product. Netflix changed this completely.
Netflix?
I think so, at least. That we are now an on-demand entertainment society.
Yeah.
We are not going to be told, okay, you have to listen on Sunday morning at 10 o'clock to hear my program. about my financial services. Not going to happen.
Oh my gosh, you're so right.
Not going to happen. No, I'll tell you when I want to listen to it or when I want to watch it. My kids, my son's a freshman in high school. My daughter now a sophomore at Kent State. Their whole life has been audio and video on demand.
Oh yeah, my kids as well.
They've never watched on-air television.
I mean, cable is not a concept
right. It's
in
not.
their world.
So we, good or bad,
right.
That's the way our life is. And podcasts fit it perfectly. Perfectly. You don't have to design a program that you have to go listen to at a certain point in time or watch at a certain point in time, whether it's maybe television as well. You just tell them when it's available. They download it and listen to it at their convenience.
Wow, it's so true, and I've never even asked you that question before, and that's fascinating because I think it's absolutely spot on.
Right, and I think the insides of our cars have been changing as well too. There's some technology dynamic going on that is not pro radio at this point in time. There's a lot of entertainment in that dashboard, and I preface all this saying I still love radio. I'm still a part of radio. Radio is a very effective marketing medium, but the relationship that we have with auto manufacturers is very loose. That entertainment console is changing drastically every year, and radio is harder to find in there. They want you to connect your smartphone up.
Absolutely.
When you walk in that car.
Bluetooth and Wi-Fi enabled. Yeah.
And our radio needs to embrace that. Any information technology needs to embrace that your content needs to follow me with my phone into my car. So if you're not accessible in your phone, you're going to lose it. You're going to lose it. Spotify's winning with this. So radio's been a little bit behind in regards to embracing that. We have a tendency to have our head in the sand.
Well, how could they, what could they do differently?
Making sure that it's very easy to find your radio station in the car. Okay. Whether it's through a smartphone app that the entertainment is there and easy to follow you, whatever it might be, but just make it easy. Make it easy. Car manufacturers are not making it easy. I mean, there are now two models, Tesla and BMW, that have eliminated AM.
Have you really?
They have seen the cost.
I'm showing my age by saying, "Oh my gosh, they're getting rid of AM."
The cost factor to build the car to protect it's a technical thing to protect the frequency coming into the car. So they're just scrapping it all together. Now, radio is fine with that. It's like you have a smartphone app and you can stream your radio station. You're in good shape. Right. You're fine. Or if you're a simulcast FM, you're still getting it over the air and such. But it's recognizing this evolution of technology. Okay. That's key.
But certainly in your car is a perfect time to be listening to podcasts.
It is.
You know, and I do that because it's, you know, I have kids and I have a busy life and I get in my car and that's my space and that's my time. And I do listen to podcasts then because it's easier for me and on demand. You know, I can click start and stop and pause and go and I'm good. I'm ready to go.
It's amazing how infectious it is. Once you find a favorite podcast or two, all of a sudden the world opens up.
Oh my gosh, yes. And there's podcasts for everything.
There's more of these. There's more of this. There's underwater basket weaving. That's so cool. You know,
it's so true.
It's out there. You need to find it. And it's easy to find, quite frankly. You just open up your podcast player on whether it's Android now with Google Podcasts,
and even that's changed since we started doing Business Inspires. The availability and accessibility has changed in 15, 16 months.
Yeah, it's really now explaining to a potential listener what your content is, because it's really fairly easy to find the podcast. Now, some people would say, no, it's not, but well, there are native apps on your smartphone that all you have to do is open it up and search.
Right.
So therefore you need to, tell your tribe, tell your potential listeners what your content's about each episode. That's key.
Tell me how, what I think is fascinating, again, making a transition from radio to podcasts, and as podcasts continue in popularity, how advertising is affected. Podcasts there's not really advertising. There's a little bit. There's pre-roll, mid-roll, and post-roll. And, typically that's, I think, a sponsor. Okay. So you're getting a little bit of advertising. It's very light advertising. How are podcasts sustainable without advertising? Like, radio, it certainly depends on it, and TV certainly depends on it.
Lots of different approaches to sponsorships. There are a lot of networks that are being put together that you join the network and they have a sales staff that will sell advertising, pre-roll, mid-roll. Pre-roll being it runs before the podcast begins. Mid-roll is that you allow a dedicated spot placement for a commercial to be in. So that's one approach. Just this past year, it was tracked that over $300 million is being spent in podcast advertising. Small compared to everybody else, but that's an 80% growth in 1 year.
In a year. Wow.
So it will continue to be, and with the technology following to make it easier and easier to place those commercials as well, whether it's digitally inserted or as we do, on a local level, that you put a pre-roll in or mid-roll in and it's baked in, as they say.
Right.
So it's always there. A lot of businesses are creating their own podcasts and utilizing marketing dollars to create those podcasts. Okay. So they're looking at it as a marketing opportunity and they're pulling advertising from traditional radio, television to create podcasts.
So it is affecting those other markets.
It is.
Okay.
It is. I see the opportunity for consultancy. That they see it as a marketing tool. They hear it in trade magazines. They're seeing their maybe their competition, or they've been at conventions and such, and they've heard people talk about it. It's like, hey, got to get into it because it's working for us. Well, they don't know where to start. And that's where I'm seeing the opportunity with my radio background of 30 years of, selling, programming, promotions, on air as well, is to help them get where they need to go with this podcast. It's not really rocket science, but if you don't know where you're going, you don't know where you're going.
Well, and you have to be willing to adapt, which I think is what, is a huge credit to you, is that you saw this coming and you kind of honed in on it and figured it out, and it became a passion.
Right.
And now you're kind of transitioning from traditional radio and moving really more towards podcasts and consultancy. So let's talk about what Circle270 is up to, and besides Business Inspires, and and where you want to go with that.
Well, transitioning, I still have a foot in the radio because I think radio and podcasting are made for each other. It's just overall, the radio industry has not been very embracing of it. They look at it as a threat to listeners, that if they're listening to a podcast, they're not listening to a radio station. Well, why not take a look at it as, if a radio station brings that entertainment option to their listener, that listener is now becoming more loyal to the radio station because, this radio station offered this to me through their smartphone app, or an on-air personality has a one-off podcast. It's branding opportunity.
Absolutely.
So that in itself, that's why I want to continue to, be in with radio, because it's a good marriage. Beyond that, with as I mentioned earlier too, with Circle270 Media, it's helping businesses understand what best practices are. There's a lot of information out there to Google how to do a podcast. If you don't do it right the first time, you really don't have the opportunity to go backwards to do it right again. And especially when it comes to a business podcast, it's almost the same as putting a logo together. If that logo does not look good for your business, it could be a negative. You should have a good sound with this podcast. The same with video as well. If the best foot needs to be put forward, and a consultant with a radio background, as myself, can help because of all the years in of understanding audio. And audio is a different bird. It's not 30 or 60 seconds at a time. It's 25, 35, 45 minutes, again, however long you want it to be, but there's a structure to it. There is a bit of a science to it. It's always nice to have it loaded in your favor when you first start to publish.
So where do you see yourself going in the next, are you going to seek more clients and come up? You helped establish this idea of Business Inspires, and we honed it together. But, do you have some things in the back of your head, like, I think somebody needs to do a podcast on underwater basket weaving, like you said earlier. So let's find that weaver. Do you have a few things kind of, churning that you have a passion for, or that you feel is missing and has a great opportunity?
Yeah, my passion for this initially was audio drama. Okay. I am a huge fan of old-time radio.
Okay.
Of the comedies, of the sci-fi. I love that theater of the mind. That's what drew me into radio initially.
Wow.
First of all, because of just, it's a playground in your head. There are no budget limitations to creating an audio drama or a comedy that you're setting the scene in someone's head that you didn't have to pay to go to Paris to be in Paris. You just tell them, we're in Paris. That's where it's established and such. I think that's where podcasting is going to really be going as well. There is so many great audio drama podcasts out there right now that are being picked up by television for television series as well. So I think it's rich and going to be continuing to develop because the cost of coming into it is fairly low. And these writers are looking for an outlet to create these great stories.
Yeah. That's fascinating.
And such. Yeah, it is. So I think that's a realm that is going to develop. It's monetizing it that is not there yet. A lot of the listeners and followers to these audio drama series are still not real comfortable in having advertising in their audio drama. But I think as time goes on, they'll get a bit more comfortable if it's placed correctly.
Okay.
I mean, the best old-time radio shows, for example, Fibber McGee and Molly, comedy show that went over 15, 18 years long. They actually inserted their sponsor into the show, and it was part of the show. You were kind of waiting for the announcer to come in, and the longtime sponsor was Johnson Wax.
Okay.
And it was, you knew when he was coming in, he was going to insert Johnson Wax somehow.
Oh, that's funny.
And it was part of the comedy shtick.
Yeah.
That's where it's going to open up and almost product placement, I guess you could say. I think that will come into play so the listener's a bit more at ease with what's going on. And again, it's still free product. So I think the listener gets it, though, that, hey, it's free coming in. I'm going to have to give up 30 or 60 seconds of something because it's still free.
Right. Right.
So, it's a learning curve. It'll happen, but I think that's going to explode. I've not got my head around it yet either, but it still comes down to advertiser support. Advertisers haven't seen the value in that yet.
Okay.
But it will be there. It will be there eventually, probably sooner than we think. Beyond that, though, there's a lot of different monetization models.
Okay.
It really comes down to what the podcaster's comfortable with, what they want to do. And some don't want money at all. It's a hobby. Don't care. It's their voice. They're ready to go with it. But it comes down to how comfortable the podcaster is and the agreement with the sponsor.
Okay.
What they're willing to do and what they want from that advertising
what their
medium.
goal is.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And match it up and go with it.
There was even just recently a podcasters convention in town. So what's that like? I mean, what do people do at a podcasters convention?
The Columbus Podcast Festival was a showcase for local podcasters. You had to submit and be accepted because of the limitation of how many there are and stage space and such like that too, and pay to be on stage.
There.
Yes.
Wow.
To help cover costs and such. So yeah, it basically zeroed out at the very end, and the radio station group that I'm with helped co-sponsor that this year. We are tied with it as a media sponsor. We see, the future of that as well too. Did very, very well, from a variety of local podcasters all the way to the national scene. From what I'm hearing, he wants to even bring bigger names in. As a podcast festival, it was basically podcast after podcast after podcast on stage.
Okay.
To see. Now, there are other podcast movements and conventions and such. In fact, the big one that comes up in the end of July, Podcast Movement 18, it's only about 5-6 years old, and it's grown from a few hundred participants all the way to 5,000 podcasters.
Oh, my goodness.
There.
Where's that?
Be in Philadelphia at the end of July, so I'll be there. They switch coast to coast. Last year was in Anaheim, and I just couldn't see going to Anaheim for that. I think I'll go every other year. But Philadelphia, I can do, and that's not a problem with time factor and such. When I went to PM16 in Chicago, that was my introduction to what it could really be.
Okay.
And walked away driving home from Chicago. I was on cloud nine the whole time going, this is where I got to go. This is it. This is it. The community's fantastic. It's supportive. The directions, the direction's in the right place. Yeah. It turned me into what it had to be done and gave me the insight of how to get it done as well too.
Wow.
So I'm really excited about PM18 coming up and a different perspective as well. 2.5 years in, almost 3 years. So looking at it a little bit differently in the different tracks
all you've learned in that time and all the experience you've gained in that time. And that's really cool that you went there and thought, this is what I'm going to do. And you did it.
Right.
And now you get to go back a couple years later, having done it.
Right.
And
business cards in hand and track record, doing this, doing that and such. So the conversations will be much different. Seeking out people to talk to will be much different.
Right.
I submitted for a couple of tracks to speak, wasn't accepted, which was fine. It's just that I love the effort of putting it together. And it's like, that was actually pretty good, but the competition's really stiff. For speaking engagements there. But thinking if I make it great, if not, that's okay too. I tried.
Right.
And take a look who spoke and try it again next year, try it again next year.
That's right.
Exactly.
That's right. And I'll tell you what I love too about podcasts is the mobility of them. And we're sitting right now in different space than we typically are. We're sitting in Versa, co-working space, close to downtown Columbus, but in the TriVillage area.
There you go.
And you've even done some live recordings at our event at Grandview Dig Fest, and those are really cool to listen to. They're short, they're sweet. They give our sponsors a little extra push and advertisement, and I learned something by listening to those. After Dig Fest, and again, we can still go back and edit those, even though they're being taped live. So I think that's a really cool piece of podcasting too. Right. Is they're so versatile. You don't have to be sitting in a studio.
You don't have to.
You can be wherever you want to be, and the atmosphere can lend right to the topic at hand, and that's really cool too.
Yeah, and I think it's where businesses are going to see this differently too when they go to their annual conventions, that they buy a booth space. Well, how do you engage those people that are walking by? Well, why not create a podcast that you're interviewing people that are getting information, and it's being done right now. Wow. By people. This is not a new idea that somebody should go run with it. It's happening now, and they're publishing these podcasts, or it's available only to attendees at a convention because of the finite number of people. Yeah. Exactly. Mm-hmm. It's endless. The ideas that you can come up with, it just is figuring out how to do it. Yeah. Because the technology's there, the equipment is there. It's just starting it and finishing, and what do you do with it afterwards? A lot of what the podcast space is doing too is that once you create it, it has a long tail that you can do a lot of different things with it, as we do with Business Inspires. We record, transcribe, blog, put it out there on a consistent basis using different applications and software that it just drips in different social media to pull you back in, because we create content that is good today and good for another year. As long as that business is in business, it's still worth listening to. And
it feels good to talk to these businesses and get to know them and create that connection. But it's a marketing piece that we're able to hand them and say, put this on your website. Let people hear you. Let people hear why you do what you do, besides the TriVillage Chamber members. But let your customers know. And I think it feels good to give that to them and give them added value as well.
Exactly.
And I really feel like we are very fortunate to work with you and be part of this industry. I think in its infancy.
It definitely
is. It's still so new, and there's so far to go.
Yeah, it's only about 12 or 13 years old, but it's still a pup.
Yeah.
It really is, because of the technology catching up with it. So, there have been podcasters that have been around for 10, 12 years. They were there at the infancy, and that was when you could only listen through iTunes, or you had the name podcast. You had to download the audio onto your iPod to listen to it, and that's where it came from. Look how far we've come in just 10 years. Right. With that, let's say 5.
Right. I mean, leaps and bounds, and we're still, like you said, it's a pup. So lots of room. Yeah. So if somebody's interested and they think, I have this really great idea, I'm going to call Brett. How do they get a hold of you?
Go to my website, Circle270Media.com is the best way to do it. That's all the information about me, everything that's going on, all the podcasts that I work with as well. It'll be under construction here in another few weeks. I'm going to change some things up, as all websites are. And the listeners are going, go through that process. But it's it works perfectly the way it is, but with things changing with what I'm doing for the remainder of this year and moving forward, obviously changes have to be made, but it's still the same basic information. But that'll give you some ideas in regards to who I am, my background, again, podcasts that I am affiliated with or work with or help produce. I am always open for a cup of coffee, phone call, just to throw out ideas. I had an email this morning from a client, or actually not really a client, but a nonprofit that I've been kind of talking to off and on. And she was asking about some technical thing with her podcast, and just threw an email back, gave her some options and such. So I'm always open for that. I mean, that's where conversations start.
Sure.
There are no expectations other than just having a conversation and see where it goes and become that go-to person. That person may run into somebody that actually is more interested and it happens. It's all paying forward, doing the right thing.
Absolutely.
Doing the right thing at the right time.
Doing the right thing. You're doing the right thing by the Chamber. So we thank you for your faith in us.
Joy.
Yes, it has been
joy.
great.
Yeah.
And I look forward to a long, long time together and continuing some podcasts.
Yeah.
But I encourage everybody listening to reach out to Brett and Circle270Media.com and take a look at what he's doing, because there's some really great stuff out there and there's plenty of room to grow. So give him a call, take a look at his website, and thank you for listening.
Thanks for subscribing, downloading, and listening to Business Inspires, a monthly podcast of the TriVillage Chamber Partnership. Our innovative and active chamber is successful because of our smart and engaged members who cultivate our strong business community. With more than 60 years as an integral part of the Grandview, Upper Arlington, and Marble Cliff communities, the TriVillage Chamber Partnership is dedicated to a single purpose: the success of the business community. You can find a link to our website in the podcast notes to learn more about the TriVillage Chamber Partnership. For information about this podcast, to schedule a guest appearance, or to find out more about sponsoring this podcast, our contact information is in the podcast notes. Make sure you rate and review our podcast on iTunes. That helps us spread the word about Business Inspires.
Circle270Media.com.